Hey guys, thanks for checking out the project. You'll want to stick around to the end because I have some really big news to share with you. In the meantime, enjoy the video. All right, you guys, we're back and working on our twin charged Magnum again. In our last episode, you saw me fab up the downpipe here. Couldn't be happier with how this downpipe came out. Looks absolutely fantastic. Now we're gonna move on to something that I've actually been putting off for quite some time. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that this intake manifold I built does not have injector bungs in it yet. There's no provision for that. I need to get those things welded in. I've really been putting that off because I put so much time and effort into this intake manifold. I'm absolutely terrified of ruining it. So I just haven't been doing it. So I need to get on that, get that done, because we're gonna start to move into our fuel system now and get that all prepped and ready to go. That'll be one step closer for us to actually get this thing all fired up. So if you didn't know, I've got an old Craftsman lathe, really small, but it's useful for situations like this where I need to turn up some injector bungs. So I went ahead and got some 7/8 inch aluminum round stock and went ahead and turned up these bungs. Now I made them fairly thick like that on purpose because I knew I was gonna have to put a ton of heat into these runners to get these things to weld to it. I didn't wanna buy a set of off-the-shelf injector bungs because they're fairly thin wall, and getting that to weld to this 1/4 inch thick wall here would have been very difficult. So that's why I went the route that I did in making my own. Now we need to go ahead and get these things basically shaped, angled, drilled, and then welded onto the runners. Fairly straightforward process. I'm terrified. Let's do it. All right, we've got our intake manifold prepped and ready. We have the holes all drilled. They are at the correct angle. I went ahead and cut the injector bungs at a slash angle here to put them at the angle that I want them to be. And also I went ahead and turned up this plug in the lathe. So essentially what this allows me to do is to put this in the injector bung, in the intake manifold, and it keeps everything in line so I can actually weld the bung and it doesn't move around. So nothing left to do but to weld this thing. Let's do it. Oh man, you guys, I cannot tell you how excited I am with how this came out. Like I said, I've been putting this off forever because I was just so concerned that I was going to actually ruin something on this. I mean, I know it's all metal and you can fix anything given enough time, but time is one thing that I don't really have a lot of. So I was really hoping that this would go well. And I'm so happy with how these injector bungs came out. They welded up very nicely on there. Only a couple of little issues, but they cleaned up pretty well. And then I was able to weld the inside of the runners in here, because if you guys haven't seen the previous episodes, I wasn't able to get to the back of the runner here because it's just too tight, no access. So I had to weld the inside of the runners. So got all that done. So this intake manifold is officially finished. Well, I say that, but I'll probably have to add a bung on the back here for a vacuum line, something of that nature. But 99% this thing is finished, and that was the really tricky part. So I'm just so excited to have this actually done. I love the way it came out. Now we can move on to building our fuel rails. All right, we've got our intake manifold all finished up. Now we're going to turn our attention to the fuel rails. Now the reason I'm building my own fuel rails for this system is because the factory Hemi fuel system setup is a returnless style. That means that the fuel is regulated at the pump itself in the tank, and then it comes up and goes into the fuel rails and does not return back to the tank again. I'm going to go to a return style system because the fuel system is going to go through a fuel pressure regulator, which is on when the fuel is on its way back to the fuel tank. So we're having to change some things up, so I just thought it'd be easier just to make my own fuel rails for this thing. Hopefully this is not going to be a big project. I've got my raw materials here, a couple of fittings to weld on there. Let's go ahead and get this thing done. Okay, a bunch of work later and we've got our fuel rails all ready to weld up. A lot of labor intensive stuff here, but these were fairly straightforward to do. Now let's get them welded up, make them look pretty, get them on that intake manifold. Could not be happier with how these fuel rails came out. Love the look of these things. I went ahead and wire wheeled them and then hit them with some Scotch-Brite, give them a nice even finish on there. I think they're turning out really good. Now we're only about 90% done here. We still need a way to actually mount these fuel rails to the manifold, so that's what we're gonna work on next. I just have to say before we go any further, I think this looks awesome with the fuel rails on there. Now we're starting to look like an actual intake manifold. Really love the look of it so far. So basically how we're going to do this is on the mounting for the fuel rails, I'm going to mount them on top of where the bolts go for this supercharger. So what I have is I have a number of these studs here that are gonna go in the manifold itself. The supercharger will go down on top of those studs and then there'll be nuts on the top of that. But on select studs, two here and two here, we're going to run some straps over from the fuel rail to the top of the supercharger there. That'll be what keeps our fuel rails in place. So let's get the supercharger on, start building those straps. There we go. Oh man, you guys, I cannot tell you how excited I am with how this turned out. Exactly how I wanted it to look. It has that homemade feel to it, but without being kind of a, wow, that's sketchy kind of a homemade way. I think it looks pretty clean. I think it looks nice. I'm really happy with how the mounting came out. Oh, if you guys are wondering, these are actually Hellcat injectors. Now, essentially what I'm trying to do with this project is duplicate the power of what a Hellcat puts out. So I figured Hellcat injectors would be a nice choice. I can get them for a fairly decent price. And besides that, I know they're OEM quality and are gonna work really well. So that's what we've gone with here. All right, getting to that big news I was talking about. As some of you may or may not know, back in 2021, I did Rocky Mountain Race Week 1.0 with my 392 Hemi Swap C10. Now, if you don't know about Rocky Mountain Race Week, it's one of the drag and drive type events that are kind of sweeping the nation right now. Now, if you don't know much about them, there's a ton of them out there, like Hot Rod Drag Week was the originator. You've got Rocky Mountain Race Week, there's Sick Week down in Florida. Midwest Drag Week, so there's a lot of different options that are out there. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the concept of these, basically what's happening is you are taking your race car and racing it at a series of tracks throughout a week, but the key here is that you have to actually drive your race car from each track and only be able to fix it yourself, that sort of thing. The idea is to prove it's an endurance-based race, and it's to prove how well built your race car actually is. They're a ton of fun, and I had an absolute blast on Rocky Mountain Race Week. Now, when I started building this particular project with the twin charge Magnum setup on there, the idea was to make it a drag and drive capable type of vehicle. That was kind of the thought behind it. However, since I moved back here to Oregon, there's no drag and drive events on the West Coast. So the idea of trailing this thing all the way back to Colorado to take part in Rocky Mountain Race Week, which as of this time was the closest drag and drive type event that we had, was just really not feasible. And the whole time I was hoping that someone would actually get a West Coast based drag and drive event going sometime in the future. Now, I imagine that when that happened, it would actually be either in the Pacific Northwest, really high up by Portland, Washington area, or way down Southern California, down the LA area. Now, instead, something very exciting has happened. There's an event called the Redwood Rally that is actually much more local to me. It starts in Redding, California, and then goes over to the coast to Eureka, California, then up to Coos Bay, Oregon, then over to Medford, Oregon, slightly inland, and then back down to Redding, California. That is easily within my capabilities to bring my vehicle to that. And the great news is I actually have been registered for this event. So we are taking Magnum PI on the Redwood Rally, a drag and drive event. Now this takes place in late September. The really exciting thing about this race for me is that it is a homecoming of sorts. In fact, the route that we drive through actually goes through my original hometown where my parents still live. So these are all my old stomping grounds, racetracks I've been at before and raced at when I was younger. So I am so excited about this, a lot of nostalgia on this trip, and also I can guarantee you that of all the drag and drive events, this one is going to have by far the best scenery on the dry portion. So I'm excited to bring that to you. My goal here is to be able to post daily while I'm on the race, get these episodes out and upload to you so you can see it as it happens and take you guys along with me. So I cannot be more excited about this. Now, as is usually the case with these drag and drive type events, I knew that registration was going to be tight, and sure enough, the whole event sold out in 20 minutes. Now, this is the inaugural running of this event, so no question there's going to be a little bit of teething issues as they go along. That's all to be expected, not a big deal. Now, I'm sure there's a few of you who are thinking, man, September is 8 months away. I hope you're not going to take that long to actually finish this car. And no, that's not the idea. I'm hoping to have this car running, driving, and racing by June. That way I can actually do some test and tune with this at my local drag strip here, kind of get things ironed out and dialed in a little bit before we actually take it on the event. So we kind of have a known quantity going into it. I really don't want to do another event like I did with my C10, where I just have no idea going into it how it's going to perform. So that's the idea. I want to have this thing up and driving by June. Earlier than that would be fantastic, but that's the goal. So that's the big news, you guys. We are going racing once again. And as always, I want to thank you guys so much for how much you support me in the channel and this particular build. It's really been fun so far. And I know you guys are excited to see this thing fire up. I am too. I'm trying to knuckle down and do as much as I can each video to get that out to you guys. But we're all in this together, right? We cannot wait to see what this thing can do. And man, it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you stay with me next time on Reignited.